talking about educational research. We will be debunking edu myths. We'll be talking about books, including Paul's books and other books that have discussed his work, including my own and that of other authors. And also, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say, if you missed the show last week, my special guest was Professor John Hattie. And that was a wonderful episode where John Hattie joined me live from Melbourne. And if you missed that, you can go onto any podcast provider, search for Teachers Talk Radio, and you will find it there with The Breakfast Show with Kate Jones. So as I said, today another special guest, and I do say every week, this is a very special episode, this is a special episode, but I have been very fortunate to have all of these wonderful guests join me, and I've actually got a lot more guests lined up. So I can see Paul Kirshner, you are there in the studio. Right, can you press, I did see you call in and then it cut off. Don't worry, as I said, this is live, this sometimes happens. As soon as we connect the call, then everything goes smoothly from there. So I can see you, Paul. If you go, because it's slightly different in the app, and you can see the boss, Tom Rogers, is there. Tom, could you just write in the comments box which of the buttons that Paul needs to press to join in? And then if that doesn't work, it sometimes does work to perhaps leave and then rejoin and call. So as we're sorting that out, as I've said, last week we had John Hattie. People have been catching up on previous episodes with Tom Sherrington, Oliver Caviglioli, Mary Myatt, the team from Inner Drive, Bradley Bush and Edward Watson. And you will spot a theme with all of my guests. And whilst I really do want to promote lots of diversity in terms of the guests, I do make the point that because I have the breakfast slot, which is 7 a.m. in the UK, lots of the teachers that I know and that I've reached out to have said, that isn't the best time for me. I'm driving to work, I'm on my way to school, I can listen, but I can't perhaps call in. Right, here we go. Paul Kirshner has just called in. Let's see, Paul, are you there? Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yay! Thanks, Paul. We got it. That's the hard bit over, honestly. We had this issue with Mary Myatt and a few other people, so do not worry. But we got there. So welcome. Hello, good morning. Thanks for getting up, Paul.
It's quite all right. It's an honor. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm usually up fairly early in the morning. And luckily, British summertime is an hour earlier than here. So while everybody else in Great Britain is getting up to listen at 7 o'clock, for me, it was getting on at 8 o'clock in the morning. So I've already had breakfast and I have a cup of tea and ready and willing.
Oh, amazing. And you're in the Netherlands, right?
I'm in the Netherlands now. I'm in the south of the Netherlands, in hill country. And it looks like the sun is shining outside. So it should be a good day.
Brilliant. Well, people listening, do comment and tell us where you're listening from. It's very international. Paul in the Netherlands and I'm in Abu Dhabi. So, Paul, when I introduce my guests, I like to start off with a fun fact about them. So here's my fun fact about you, which actually links into what we'll be talking about today. So at age 16, you worked for the Postal Service in the United States. And when you were learning the zip and postal codes for your different routes, you did that by using retrieval practice with flashcards. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the way we all learned it. That's the way we were taught to do it. My father also worked at the post office. And I remember when I was a child, seeing him sitting there in the chair with these, not even 3x5 cards about the size of a business card, with on the one hand an address or a list of addresses, and on the other hand a postal code that was before we even had the word zip codes, and flipping them and putting them into two piles and things like that, and watching him learn the zip codes so that he could sort post packages and letters.
Well, that's amazing, because at that point, that term, the retrieval practice and the testing effect, you obviously weren't the established academic researcher that you are now, but that's what helped you learn the postal codes, which is just amazing.
That was normal in that time. Strangely enough, in my elementary school, a lot of the things that we talk about today were done by my teachers there.
Yeah, and actually, we'll just do a little bit of a background about your career. And you were a teacher for a bit, is that correct?
Yeah, well, maybe should I give a short biography? Would that help?
Yes, I would love to hear that. Yeah, I've got 3 things written down. So you give your biography and I'll see if I'm correct with my research.
Well,
Go for it.
I was born in 1951 in a hospital in the Bronx, and I lived my whole life up through secondary school in the Bronx. Went to a very good high school there, the Bronx High School of Science. Was a very good student there. And after that, I went to 2 different universities, first Syracuse University, and then the State University of New York at Stony Brook, in which I graduated with a double major. I was a teacher of natural sciences and mathematics. And I also had a bachelorate in psychology. And I started teaching at a middle school there. And I was teaching biology there. And I got very, very, very frustrated. I was teaching and I had normal middle school children. That's, let's say, the age of 12 to 16. That's the last 2 years of elementary school and the first 2 years of secondary school. And it didn't matter how I explained things, what I did. Maybe I had the curse of expertise in that I myself was a very good student who actually never had a problem learning things. And I got so frustrated that there were these children that I just couldn't reach, that I decided that maybe teaching wasn't the right thing for me. And I left the United States. For a year, I was a hippie with hair down to my shoulders, earring in my ear. And in those times, we talked about things like to get my head together. And I came to the Netherlands. I knew some people there. I hung out there. I lived on a houseboat. I was a cook. I was a carpenter. I was a head cook. And was doing all different types of things. Made the hippie thing, went to India, did what I was supposed to do. And right before I left for India, my wife, at that point, she was just my girlfriend, said, I want to go back to school and not study philosophy. I want to do education. Why don't you see if you can go back to the university? See if you can try to understand what was going wrong. So I went back to university and I studied first developmental psychology and then educational psychology. And I learned all of these incredible things about text characteristics and learning processes, mathemagenic activities from Ernst Rothkopf, Auschwitz and advanced organizers, how to write learning objectives, how different types of illustrations affect how you look at an illustration, understand it, read it, and actually learn from it. And all of a sudden, I got all of this background from why I didn't do it right when I was there. So I got my degree there and went to work at a educational publisher and found out that while my idea was quality should be your advertisement, their idea was advertising is our quality. Decided I had to go somewhere else. So I went to the Open University here in the Netherlands, which was primarily text-based, and my expertise was text characteristics and learning processes. And as they say, the rest is history. I worked there from 83 on and became an assistant professor, associate professor, did my PhD, became a full professor, went to 2 different universities. And towards the end of my career, decided, okay, I've done enough pure science. Let's see what we can do for the educational field, because I was still in love with it. I was kind of like the football player who says, I was lucky enough to make my passion, my hobby, into my profession. Well, that was the same thing for me with teaching. And I made a switch from only writing scientific articles and every once in a while giving a presentation to primarily writing books for teachers, doing a translation of what the science says for how you can use it in the classroom, writing blogs, doing those types of things. And now I'm, what they say, retired, although I haven't really reaped the benefits of rest and relaxation in my retirement. And I'm here now talking to you about radio, teacher talking radio.
I was going to say, you don't seem retired to me with everything that you're doing. You're very busy. But actually, that's why I am such a fan of your work, because you are just really influential in making that academic research accessible and understandable to teachers. And we'll talk lots and lots about that. But I am so disappointed, because I was meant to meet you in Dubai for Research Ed 2020. And obviously that never happened. You were the keynote speaker at that event. And basically, the Research Ed movement in the last few years has just been incredible. And I know obviously it's been led by Tom Bennett and Helene, but I think you've played a really key role in that. So I did want to just ask you about, how did that connection come about? And actually, do you have any plans, even though you're retired, to speak at any upcoming Research Ed events?
Well, how did that come? A chance internet meeting, Twitter meeting with Tom Bennett, who had apparently read some of the things that I've written, and asked me if I'd like to come. I mean, it's really strange. Some people are afraid to ask things of me. I guess my facade of being a grumpy old man is a little bit too good of a facade, and people see it as kind of like, they don't realize that actually I'm just a kid from the Bronx actually. And I met up with Tom, and it was just an immediate click between the two of us. We were just on the exact same wavelength. We had the same, let's say, ultimate goal in life, and that's to make education better, to allow children, to help children to get effective, efficient, and enjoyable learning. So I was invited to a number of different Research Ed conferences, including the national in Great Britain, and also in other countries, in Denmark and Sweden. Scotland.
Did you? Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
I have
Seen you in the kilt.
I love it with my Well, I that was an ultimatum to Tom, because I know Tom is also a Scot, and I said I had been to my brother-in-law and my wife's sister, so my sister-in-law, their daughter got married there, and I rented a kilt, because I figured if you're going to a formal wedding in Scotland, you need to dress formally. So I got myself a kilt there, and I found it so enjoyable that I gave Tom an ultimatum. I said, I will come to Scotland under one condition, or actually under two conditions. One is that you rent a kilt for me, and two, that you also wear your kilt, so that they walk around together. So he took the dare, and he did it, and there are pictures that prove it. And
I'll tweet them.
My one regret is that it didn't happen where you were, because if I remember correctly, you were going to wear your red shoes, and we were going to dance and paint the town red, and that didn't happen.
I know. Hopefully it will. There's plans, but I'm very hopeful we'll meet at a Research Ed event somewhere in the world.
I'll be going to the national in any event. I've spoken to Tom, and the idea is that I'll be at the national in September. I think it's for the 4th of September. I will be at EdFest again this year, but that'll be online. Unfortunately, it's not going to be live. And in the Netherlands, there's a Research Ed in June, on the 19th of June, and I'll be giving 2 presentations there. One dealing with productive learning techniques with Tim Surma and the other with Hannah Bijlsma and Adrie Visser on why in heaven's name, if we know all of this, it's just so hard to get teachers on board to make use of things that we know work. So I'll be doing that.
Yeah.
And there'll also be a research ed in Belgium in October that I'm going to. So I'll be doing 3 research eds that I know of in the next couple of months.
Yeah, definitely not retired, but I'm really glad that you are speaking at these events, because I also loved your research at home. That when that was happening with lockdown, I found that really helpful. So even though we're not in lockdown anymore, lots of great advice. And I will tweet out all of these links that Paul and I are talking about, as well as the photograph of Paul Kirshner wearing a kilt. I will tweet out. But actually, at the research ed event in Dubai that did happen, I met someone else who I'm a big fan of, and someone that you've collaborated with, and I apologize, I might say his name wrong, Pedro de Bruquier.
No, that's completely wrong. Pedro.
Oh, okay.
Is, as in the Spanish way, and his last name is de Bruikere.
Oh no, I'm so sorry, Pedro. Well, actually, that links in really good about what else I wanted to talk to you about. Pedro, and again, I'm worried I'm going to say his name wrong, Casper Hulshoff? Or is that?
Casper Hulshoff.
Oh, Hulshoff. Okay,
yeah.
A little bit closer.
Yeah, it's very good. It's just where you make the break. You did Hulshoff, but it's Hulshoff.
Oh,
the break is between the S and the H.
Oh, well, that is really good to know, because I get a little bit scared when I quote them in presentations about pronunciation. Okay. So that's very helpful. But you have been working with Pedro and Casper for years about your book, Urban Myths About Learning and Education. I really loved, it was a paper that you wrote, and again, I think this is a few years ago, ICT myth busting. And it's just, you must feel so frustrated, because obviously in your new book, which we'll talk about, there's the 10 deadly sins of education. And these myths, the learning pyramid, learning styles, discovery learning, the best way to learn, they do still exist in schools. And I know this from conversations with teachers and from the previous school I worked at. And I just wanted to ask you about this. Like I said, you must be frustrated, because why do these edu myths still exist in schools, and how can we challenge them?
Well, I'm frustrated up to a point. I'm actually happy to see the growing community of people who are working on the basis of evidence, as I call it, evidence-informed and not evidence-based. And in any event, I see around me a growing group of people who are no longer willing to accept the myths that we come across. It's steadily growing, but it's not large enough. There's still too many of what I call philosophically romantic educators who base their work on things that sound good, sound like how it should be, but how it should be isn't always how it is. I mean, wouldn't it be great if all you had to do was motivate a child, and then she or he would, by some magic wand, would learn in an effective, efficient, and enjoyable way. And it sounds so good. And we all know when we're motivated, we try harder, but they don't understand that being motivated and trying harder is a good start, but it doesn't help you learn. Only good instruction and instructional techniques help you learn. So the greatest thing in the world that a teacher can do is get her or his kids motivated to start doing things and start working on things. You've broken down the first barrier, but once you've done that, you then have to use effective and efficient and enjoyable learning techniques or teaching techniques, learning strategies in order to help them learn. And that's the thing I mean, that's kind of like the next step. I see that some of the most salient myths, like the learning pyramid, there is a growing group of people who understand that that doesn't work. The major problem with it is the bottom part of that triangle. It's not even a pyramid. Um, is so related to that romantic, progressive, Rousseau, Dewey idea of the open and lovely child who should be given all types of freedom and all types of chances, and if given enough room, will be able to do it her or himself. That until you get rid of that 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 myth, yeah,
Yeah.
a number of other myths will still remain in place. But I feel the idea that the movement is going. People are doing the right things, are beginning to do the right things. They're becoming better educated, and they're listening and thinking. That's the most important thing. They're acting based upon knowledge and thinking about it, and not based upon what sounds good or should feel good or their gut feelings. But it's hard. I mean, today's teachers have been taught in that way, and their teachers have been taught in that way. This progressive movement is something that started, the so-called progressive movement, in the 60s of last year. I mean, a great article to read about that is Rich Mayer's "There Should Be a Three Strikes Rule in Education," in which he says every time it comes back, it's proven to be false. It goes away a little while and it comes back in a new metamorphosis. It's kind of been morphed into a new virus. Actually, that would be a great thing, is calling it the virus that's continually morphing or mutating, and comes back even more virulently in the next generation. And that's the hard
Yeah.
part about it.
Yeah, you make excellent points, because I've messaged you when I've seen these tweets promoting learning styles, and I get worked up and angry and frustrated. But actually, like we've just said, with Research Ed, with these amazing books like yours that have come out, and lots of others, and learning scientists, we are definitely moving in the right direction. I think for me, my personal experience was early on in my career, I just didn't have the confidence to challenge learning styles, and I assumed, because it sounded that it was grounded in research, it sounded, like you said, it sounded lovely, and it sounded effective, but actually the reality of it in the classroom, and then that does link in, actually, I was going to mention it later, but actually it does link in with what I've called in my book the Kirshner effect, and I've just tweeted that out, the extract. But over the years, and this wasn't something I did in the early years of my career, but over probably the last 6 years, out of teaching for about 11 years, I've been reading more, engaging more with lots of evidence research, books, blogs, and I've called this passion to be evidence informed, which has led to me feeling more confident as a teacher, more motivated to keep learning, to keep developing, and also this desire to challenge outdated myths. That's what I call the Kirshner effect, because that's obviously been the effect that you've had on my practice. I hope you're okay with me calling it that.
Oh, you can call it. You can call it. I mean, people have called me worse things in my life. So I'll take any positive feedback that I can get. You said you didn't have the confidence, and I can't believe that. I think you did have the confidence. I think what you didn't have, and what I didn't have when I started teaching, was the knowledge necessary
Yeah.
To debunk the myth yourself, to be actually a reflective practitioner. I was a product of pure behaviorism. I mean, you have to realize I did my studies in psychology and education in the 60s, and we could say mid to end 60s was the first breakthrough of the cognitive revolution. Up till that time, everything was a black box. So I think you and a lot of other teachers didn't have the knowledge to understand that, to debunk it yourself.
Yeah.
What you also didn't have, and what a lot of people don't have, is learning style sounds good. Okay, I can't deny that. Uh, Everybody has a preferred way of doing things. I mean, and I'm talking about everything, a preferred way of walking or getting to their work, a preferred way of eating, a preferred way of making love, a preferred way of they think of yeah, don't laugh, it's true.
Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
I just wasn't
um,
expecting that.
yeah, of course.
But yes,
But
you're making a really good point.
learn to expect the unexpected from me. So you also have a preferred way that you want information to come to you, and it's often a way that makes you feel good, or that's easiest, or that seems easiest. And so if you think about how you learned or how you do any of the other things, you can say you have a preferred learning style or eating style or lovemaking style or whatever. But learning style is something specific. There's something called the meshing hypothesis. And that means if you receive it in that way, it works. It works, not only works best, but it works. And if you receive it in a way that's not according to your learning style, you won't learn. And it's kind of like think for yourself. Yeah, well, I like seeing it in a video, but does that mean I don't learn when I read it? And they don't think about that. They don't know the difference between a learning style and preferred. If I'm in a room of 200 people, if I'm giving a lecture and I'm in a room of 200 people and I ask them via an app, what do you prefer? What's your favorite food? What do you like the best? What would you prefer to eat? And I gather that up and I look at it. Well, I can tell you right now, I can put that into a Venn diagram of three categories. It's either sweet, salty, or fatty. And some of them are combination. I mean, if you like whipped cream, you like it because it's sweet and it's fatty. If you like chips, it's because it's salty and fatty. If you like Ben and Jerry's caramel sea salt ice cream, it's because it's all three. That's the reason why it sells. But that doesn't make it what's best for you. That's not the diet that a good dietitian should give you. And now it's the same thing with something like learning styles. But the problem is that people, teachers in their training, their pre-service training, and a lot of their in-service training are getting the same BS from teachers who also don't understand the difference between what's preferred and what's a learning style. They learn multiple intelligences without having read Martin Gardner, who himself says, and I just tweeted about that recently, that it has absolutely no use in education. And they're just told, and it sounds good. Of course, there are some people are better at this. Some are, we'll call that multiple intelligences, and we're going to play to those multiple intelligences in our teaching. But the man himself says it has absolutely no function in education, and teachers, pre-teachers, aren't taught that. So you have an incredible amount of confidence, Kate, but you didn't have when you started the knowledge that you needed. It's kind of like if you didn't teach a general practitioner what a bacteria was, what a virus was, what the different organs in the body were, and that uh, 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 a bacteria you can use certain drugs with, but a virus you can't. That's the way you want your doctor to be. But for some strange reason, we don't do that with teachers. And that's the
Yeah,
thing
I
I
mean
don't
that.
understand. That frustrates me more than all of those
Yeah,
myths, that we don't give teachers the knowledge and skills that they need to carry out their job properly, because they want to. They're incredibly
yeah,
dedicated. They spend for actually a meager pay. They put in 60, 70 hours a week because they're dedicated. They want to help their children. And it's kind of like the having a doctor do her or his best, but not having taught them anatomy, physiology, pathology, and how those things relate to each other, and why an antibiotic works with a bacteria. Antibio, it has to be living, it has to be a biotic, yeah, to work, and a virus isn't. And you say, okay, without any of that training, you're now a GP and go help people with the minimum background that you've received. And some countries are better and worse than others, but that's for me at this moment the biggest frustration: how poorly equipped beginning teachers are, and how little help they get in their first years on the road to becoming good or expert teachers.
I think you're absolutely spot on. And again, about my lack of knowledge and understanding and just accepting that. In the UK, the Early Careers Framework have adapted an evidence-informed approach. And again, they're moving in the right direction. Obviously, we've still got a long way to go, but that links to everything that you said about teachers early on in their career. Very keen, very enthusiastic, well-intentioned, but I had to, in a way, I had to play the game. I was told to qualify as a teacher, I have to do X amount of lesson observations. I have to cater for different learning styles in my classroom. My gut instinct felt like I don't really feel like this is effective. But again, like I said, I had to almost, it felt like play the game, do what I was told. And I didn't have that knowledge. I didn't have that awareness. And I wish I'd been able to quote you and say, because actually that's what happened in my previous school when I arrived. They had learning styles as part of their lesson agendas. And I was able to share with them lots of research summaries and things that you and others had written, and they were very good, and they did listen to me, and we moved in a different direction. And
yeah,
you know what's really
there are things going in that right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a massive fan of you and a massive fan of the Bjorks, Professors Robert and Elizabeth Bjork. And I contacted them a bit like, actually, we had a Zoom chat about retrieval practice, which was incredible. And I reached out to them as well. And Elizabeth Bjork said to me that she was very frustrated that they've been doing research for decades about memory, and it wasn't getting to the people who really needed to know about it, which were the teachers. Which, when I think back, I was training in 2010. I'd never heard of cognitive psychology and an evidence-informed approach and actually getting to grips with research. So there's been this gap between the academic and teaching community, and that's, you've been instrumental in that, in closing that. I mean, look at us now. I'm a teacher and you're an academic, and we're talking about education. That is a great example of the gap closing.
But that's what I'm trying to do. That's my problem with teacher training colleges. I constantly either compare it to a doctor or a cook. Can you imagine a doctor who didn't learn anatomy? And I think that's a rhetorical question, because I think the answer is no. But apparently you can imagine a teacher that didn't learn how people learn cognition. It's the teacher training colleges have the idea, if you create a kind of bond with your students, and you make it a comfortable place for them, they'll learn, and they don't teach you the things you need to know. You can think of a mechanic who doesn't know how an internal combustion engine works. You can't think of a cook who doesn't understand how an oven works and the interaction between an oven and a type of food. Those are all both from, let's say, typical manual occupations up to a doctor or a lawyer which is, let's call it, a more cerebral professional. All of them have that. Why is it the case that you don't need that and the schools don't give that when you're training to become a teacher? And that's problem number one. And I can give a partial answers because the teachers at the teacher training colleges also got this BS. And their teachers also got that BS. And if you look at the learning materials, in America, there was a great study on it. We replicated that in the Netherlands and Belgium. And we found that things like retrieval practice and space practice, because that's what we did it on, both of those were only in the learning materials of one of the 24 teacher training colleges in the Netherlands and Flanders, that were taught what it was, why it works, and how to use it. We did find multiple intelligences and learning styles everywhere, but those two approaches was only at one teacher training college in all of the Netherlands and Flanders, in a way that told them what it is, why it works, and how to use it. Those were our three criteria. Now, that's completely absurd if you think of it in that way. And so the books that they're using, the teachers that they have, it's all Greek to them. And you have teachers coming ill-prepared, as I was in 1972 when I was a teacher, coming ill-prepared and getting very frustrated and not knowing what to do. And luckily, we have Research Ed and Robert and Elizabeth Bjork, who are coming up with these types of things and who are trying to translate it. If you don't mind, I'd like to go into why the problem is with teachers possibly don't make use of what the Bjorks say. And that's because they don't understand the difference between achievement and learning. Achievement is short term. That's the thing that right after you've had the class, if you ask them then to take the test, how well they score and how high they score, that's achievement. Learning is if you taught it Monday and they don't do anything or very few things between Monday and Friday and next Friday, if they still know it, that's more longer term. And the techniques that don't work tend to appear to work when it's about achievement. That short term, reading something twice and then taking the exam right after that works better than reading something and answering questions about it. Okay, after 5 minutes or at the end of it, okay, they learned it. But and you see that with all types of apps like the teachers are using, or they say, okay, we get it in, they've learned it. Okay, we go tomorrow, we go to the next thing. But that's achievement. That's not learning. And if we look at reading and rereading as opposed to reading and retrieval practice, we see that in the long term, after 2 days, after 5 days, after 10 days, that the rereading doesn't work and the other thing does. And that they don't understand the difference. And what does a child do then for the test? The night before or the morning of, sits and reads and rereads and again has the achievement on the test, but forgets it by that afternoon. They haven't learned it. And that makes it very,
Well, actually, when we had a conversation,
into thinking they've learned it.
Yeah, and when we had that conversation, so I just made the point of there's this research teachers really need to know, but actually our conversation about retrieval practice, where you said to me, Kate, the students have got to see what's in it for them, and that it works, and that honestly, that really did change things for me, because I had kept saying, oh, retrieval practice is effective. The research says this, the research says that to the students. And then they were still rereading and highlighting. But then I took a different approach that you suggested, where it was explicitly showing them how it works, showing them the retrieval practice strategies and what they can recall and then what they struggle to recall. And something that I am concerned about, because this research, it's amazing that it's getting to teachers and even to students now. And like I said, I wish I'd have known about it sooner, because there was this gap, but I feel the gap is closing. Something that I am worried about, and I thought it'd be really interesting to get your perspective on this, is there's a book that's recently been published, and I can't comment too much because I haven't read the whole book. And it's Guy Claxton, The Future of Teaching, The Myths That Hold It Back. And something that bothers me is that he talks about cognitive science from over 30 years ago being old hat. And the reason why that bothers me is because I think, well, yes, it is from 30 years ago, but it took a long time to actually get to teachers. And the research studies that are, let's just say, from 30 years ago, I don't think we should be dismissing because of that.
The rocket technology that's bringing us to the moon and Mars is basically physics that we learned a couple of hundred years ago from Newton. It's based upon action and reaction. The burning of fuels that are coming out of the bottom of a rocket or a missile is that what gives the reaction of moving the rocket up. So by saying it's based upon something that's 30 years old, I mean, we're doing surveying based upon Pythagoras. Let's not I mean, even the most modern day laser technology, the fact that we're able to talk to each other in this way, which is going through a satellite, is based upon Pythagorean theorem and measuring how these things relate to each other so that this signal comes across. It's such a stupid idea to have, that it's based upon, as if our brains have changed in the last 30 years. Our brains haven't changed in the last 10,000 years since we were a Homo sapiens. So, I mean, please, because that's the dumbest premise I've ever heard. Yours, but that's the dumbest premise I've ever heard.
Oh, sorry that I'm laughing. Well, actually, yeah. I mean, I think I know you haven't read the Guy Claxton book. And
I haven't read it for two reasons.
Yeah,
I read the reviews of it. The first is I don't want to give. I'd prefer to spend the money on going to a restaurant instead of buying something that's non-digestible. And the second reason is I refuse to let him profit in royalties from my buying the book, even if it's only to hate the book. I have too many other things on my head, too many other things that I'm doing and I want to do, to waste my time getting annoyed at something like what he is apparently saying, in any event, from the 7 or 8 reviews that I've read of it. And so that's about it. He's not going to get one brass farthing, to create to quote Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. He's not getting one brass farthing from me.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that, by the way. I was just and also I thought I'd give you that opportunity to, and I wanted to ask, just because looking at the back of the book where it says Kirshner, you're referenced on 7 different pages, and there's quite a lot of discussion of you and other individuals named. And actually, by the way, people listening, Tom Rogers did interview Guy Claxton on Teachers Talk Radio about the book, so you can listen on there. But yeah, he Claxton made the point about your book, about he said 19 out of the 28 papers were published 30 years ago or more, but you've addressed that point really well. Then another thing that I just sort of wanted to, and this will actually link in with your work that we'll talk about that's been really influential. But so Claxton uses he refers to it as direct instruction, knowledge rich, DIKR. And he says the DIKR folk think they have a new trump card up their sleeves, cognitive science. Not only do they think that DIKR is the best way to go, but they argue that cognitive science has proven it is the only psychologically valid way of educating. Now, there's been a lot of links to and a lot of discussion. So I think one of the most influential papers in education will be the one that you did with John Sweller and Dick Clark. And so I think that is in reference to that. And actually, by the way, for anyone not familiar with that, what I found really helpful was your article that you wrote for the American, because I think that paper was in 2006. Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And then in 2012, you summarized that together, the three of you, as an article for the American Educator, which is great. Now, I wanted to just read out this quote, which I think for me sums it up really well, and then we'll just take it from there. So this is written from the American Educator, 2012, Kirshner, Sweller, Clark. Our goal in this article is put an end to the debate. Decades of research clearly demonstrate that for novices, virtually all students, direct, explicit instruction is more effective and more efficient than partial guidance. So when teaching new content and skills to novices, teachers are more effective when they provide explicit guidance accompanied by practice and feedback, not when they require students to discover many aspects of what they must learn. Now, for me, that's some of my...
I didn't hear any word saying that, number one, it's the only way to do it.
No, I have...
We only said it... No, I mean, we only said it's more effective. So,
yes, I mean...
This guy Claxton is creating a straw man, and which he very easily can knock down. And the second is that, no, not cognitive science is not the only way. But if you want to know how people learn, you have to understand cognition. And he discussed cognitive load theory, and Greg Ashman took him to town on that because he has no idea what it is. I mean, it's really interesting that someone who is completely in the dark about something can write a scathing expose on something he actually has no knowledge of. But that's an aside.
Well, yeah, so lots of people just wanted me to ask that because there's been lots of discussion, but actually that quote that I've just picked out where it said, teaching new content and skills, novices need more explicit guidance accompanied by practice and feedback. That doesn't seem that shocking to me, though. That as a teacher, that I just thought, I don't quite understand. I understand. I don't know, but I just thought it'd be really interesting to chat to you. But it's that focus on the novice that you're really making, isn't it?
That's what all children are. I mean, we say there's an expertise reversal effect. We say that you teach experts in a different way than novices. That has nothing to do with age. It has to do with prior knowledge and the thinking processes that someone has. And in school, we're primarily busy with teaching novices who don't have cognitive schemas in their head, who think differently. And that means you choose an approach. I mean, I'm not going to teach, who should I choose? David Beckham, in the same way that I'm teaching a 12-year-old girl who wants to learn to bend it like Beckham. Yeah, I use two completely different approaches for that, because David Beckham has all of the knowledge and skills, and what I'm doing is making use of what he already knows to bring him further. That's what a tennis coach also does with their tennis pupils, and you know go down the line. But if you're nowhere near that, and you're a novice and you have no prior knowledge and no cognitive schemas in your head, then you have to use a different approach. And anybody who thinks differently either is a butterfly, as I say it, a butterfly that has forgotten that he was once a caterpillar, or is just ignorant. One of the two.
Well, we've just had a comment in from Andrew Farmer. He's put, I think teaching new content qualifier is essential. Once kids have a relative degree of expertise, might some degree of independent learning inquiry be more appropriate, possible, and useful then?
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it, it's although it's not meant as a step-by-step guide, if you look what Barak Rosenshine has told us, says once you've reached the point, you begin, let's say number one is prior knowledge, reviewing, you go through checking if children have understood and whatever. You reach a point in which you have guided practice. Once you're sure that there's a certain amount of fundamental knowledge, and at a certain point, I think it's step number 7, he says, let them do it by themselves. Then they have the knowledge. If they stand there and make sure that there aren't any really big problems that come up. So, like, don't leave the room and think that they can do it. But of course, allow them to do it. Give them new tasks and challenges in which they have to apply what they've learned. But that's the key thing. When you're doing that, you're applying what you've already learned. That's what you want them to do. And you need, it says it in things, apply what you've learned. If you haven't learned it, you can't apply it. So, of course, he's completely right. Once they've reached a certain level of expertise, have a certain amount of knowledge and skills, then, of course, you give them tasks in which they apply it into different situations, in which they generalize to other situations, which during the generalization maybe understand similarities and differences, which is the basis of Sig Engelman's direct instruction. Seeing the similarities and the differences. That's how we learn. And there to help them, maybe what they experience, put what they experience into words so that it can be not only stored as an experience, but also be cognitively stored. So you're still there to say to them, why did you do this differently from that? And then you help them put into words the similarities and differences that they've experienced, which makes the trace in their memory stronger, which means they can make use of it the next time they come to a different problem that maybe has some of those features.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you really explain that clearly, and about the difference between, and obviously this is in your book, How Learning Happens. You explore this different, I love that, about a child not being a mini adult, and how they see the world differently, and all these things for us to be aware of. Tom Rogers, who interviewed Guy Claxton, but he put this question to Claxton, they spoke about behaviour, and how sometimes direct instruction actually can lead itself to, it depends on the class, but it might be better from a behaviour management point of view than a discovery approach where you're leading. I mean, I think, again, in your book, isn't it about, there's a section about independent learning doesn't make independent learners.
Exactly.
Is that yeah, that's it,
exactly.
Isn't it?
But it's I mean, if students are busy with something and experience success, and explicit instruction helps in small steps, helps learners experience success, they become motivated to go further. If they're trying to discover things that they can't discover because they don't have the knowledge, and they're constantly walking into walls. I don't know anymore what the English saying for that is, hitting their heads against the wall. They will become frustrated, and that will lead to helpful, beneficial behaviors, and will make a classroom that could have been a nice learning environment into a place where havoc is wreaked because the children aren't experiencing the success, the feeling of accomplishment, that they've learned something, that they can do something. Anyone who has a child, even in their playful period, will see that if the child gets an action or whatever under their knee, that's what you say in Dutch, um, um, uh, uh, can do something, they'll continue in that. If they don't, they'll become bored, disinterested, and go on to something else and won't be doing what you had hoped they would do. And it doesn't matter what it is in a board game, in sports or whatever. The most demotivating, the thing that leads to the most havoc and going on to other things is not experiencing success. And discovery by children, by learners who don't have the knowledge to discover things, is just creating a recipe for failure and everything that follows from failure, including behavior problems. It's not the silver bullet, but the idea that it's boring and that will lead to more problems in the class. It leads to less, not because you're stricter and punishing. No, it's because children are learning things and experiencing accomplishment and are becoming fulfilled and want to continue because it feels good to have success.
Yeah. Well, Tom Rogers has also commented, and Tom, I'll read this out and I'll reply to you what I think. So, Tom, you're saying, I'm guessing there are classes I've taught that have been so good in terms of behaviour, I've switched to discovery and inquiry because the class could handle it. But actually, what Paul and I are saying is that we're not talking about from a behaviour perspective. Even if you have a really well-behaved class, they are still the novices, and then they still need that explicit guidance as well. So I understand what you're saying about approaches that support behaviour, but we're talking about approaches really connected with the science of learning and how learning happens. So, well, actually, this links on really well to, I do want to talk to you about your book because I'm a big fan of it. So what I'll do is I will play the Teachers Talk Radio News. Paul, please stay on. I'm loving this, by the way. There's lots of tweets. There's lots of comments coming in. Stay on the line, everyone. We're going to share the news with Megan, and then I'm going to ask Paul, when we come back, about his latest book with Carl Hendrick, how they came to collaborate, the writing process, and lots more questions to ask. So don't go anywhere. This is so good. Right, and over to Megan Goods with the news. It should be coming up.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. Academics from universities across England, Russia, Italy and Northern Ireland have conducted an investigation into bias when awarding exam grades. The research, based on a study of 1,200 students in Russia, concluded that teacher-rated school achievement might be more influenced by personality than the objective performance measured by a standardized exam, and that teacher ratings might reflect some conscious or unconscious biases, such as judging more leniently students that they perceive as more focused on school tasks, who are well-behaved, and who are more emotionally fragile. A professor from Queen's University Belfast did, however, note that the results of the study were not marked enough to say that this bias is making a huge difference to outcomes. Older students at a school in Glasgow have been sent home following rising coronavirus rates in the community. In a letter sent home to parents, the head teacher of Shawlands Academy stated, "We understand that the situation is far from ideal, and we had all hoped that the spread of infection would not increase, but sadly this is not the case in our local area." The overall infection rate across Glasgow currently stands at 109.9 cases per 100,000 people. The head of Pimlico Academy has resigned following the recent race discrimination row. Students at the school took part in a demonstration at the end of March over uniform policy, changes to the curriculum, and the sitting of a union flag outside the building. Many felt the resignation was a long time coming, with the NEU having already passed a motion of no confidence in the head, Daniel Smith. A parent interviewed in The Guardian earlier this week stated that the school needed a leader who was from the same world as the students, so incidents like the uniform policy never happen again. That was your daily education news briefing.
Thank you, Megan Goods. Oh, such a brilliant newsreader. Okay, then, this has just been absolutely fascinating. I love this. And Paul, I started off the show with a fun fact about you working for the Postal Service. And I got that fun fact from a book by Carl Hendrick and Robin McPherson, What Does This Look Like in the Classroom? And you contributed to that book in the section about memory and recall. So that links in really nicely. Is that where your professional collaboration and friendship with Carl Hendrick began, with that book, or was it before?
Yeah, that was the beginning. It was actually the easiest chapter I've ever written in my life, because all I had to do was sit down and talk to him and Robin, and magically a few months later I had a chapter with my name as an author on it. So that was a really strange experience, and I love him for that. It's a great book, really is.
Yeah.
What Does This Look Like in the Classroom? I really like it. That was our beginning.
I liked it.
And after that, if the next question is, and how learning happens?
Yeah.
The next question. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll go through to it, and I've anticipated properly. I had worked with two young academics in the Netherlands on a partially sponsored book called, in Dutch, On the Shoulders of Giants, because I wanted to actually write a book about the giants of teaching. And it was a small book. I wouldn't call it a pamphlet, but it was a small book. It was in Dutch. It was also Creative Commons. I didn't earn a cent in royalties. It's free to download in anywhere in the world if you speak Dutch. It's been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. It's also in book form for like £15 if you want it already bound up. And I had done that, and I had this idea of, I have to go further with this. I have to go international. But I didn't want to work on it alone. And through Twitter and things like that, and actually the setup of that first book is based upon the wisdom of the crowd from Twitter, the topics in it. I got in touch with Carl because I was following him, he was following me. We had a few interactions, and I just sent him a DM, and I said, Carl, I'm going to be working on this book. It's about the giants of. We can't call it On the Shoulders of Giants because Umberto Eco had just published a book on the shoulders of giants, and we didn't want. It might have been a good way to sell the book if people had looked for the one and found ours. And our collaboration grew from that. It's very 21st century in that we met each other and we started writing with each other without ever having seen each other face to face, and the book grew out of that. But that's really not so strange because I had never met Pedro de Bruikere and Casper Hulshoff live before I worked with them on those two books. So, yeah, thanks to Twitter and the internet, I have a number of co-authors that I'm very happy working with.
Well, I'm so happy to Twitter because actually it's connected me with you, and I'm so grateful for that. And actually, I love this combination. It reminded me a little bit of Pooja Agarwal and Patrice Bain, because you are the academic researcher. Carl is still very much in the classroom at Wellington College. And it's just fantastic. And I know... oh, sorry, go.
No.
It's just a winning combination of the research, you translating it, and then these applications and top tips for the classroom. I really do like the straightforward layout of it. It's really, really helpful.
The one thing that helps is that both of us are football crazy. He for Liverpool and I for Ajax. I know you're a Manchester fan.
Yeah.
You wouldn't work well with Carl.
I know, yeah.
On that. And we also have an incredibly similar taste in music, and also with the idea of going back to the masters. If you want to understand music now, you should know what Bob Dylan and the Beatles were doing. So we share this three types of passion: one for good teaching, one for good music, and one for good football.
Well, there is a chapter, How Deep Is Your Processing? Which I thought, there's loads of them that are great. They're really, really good. But was it quite hard to, because you've got 28 studies and then you've got your bonus chapter, which actually you can download for free, that final section, the 10 Deadly Sins in Education. So I'll tweet that out, actually. It's really, really good. But was that quite hard to pick, what 28 studies work, because you do cover a range of things, from cognitive load theory to retrieval practice, Rosenshine. There's lots and lots of things.
Well,
so how do you go?
We also do goal orientation and things like that, and learning communities. No, it wasn't so. The hardest thing was whittling it down. It began by a good colleague who I love. That's Sanna Järvela. She does research on self-regulation, co-regulation, and socially shared regulation of knowledge. And I was a visiting professor at Oulun Yliopisto, the University of Oulu, at her department. And at a certain point, Sanna asked me, Paul, could you give me a list of 10 articles, books that everybody in our department should be aware of to function properly? And I said, well, that's easy. Out of the top of my head, I can write down 10 or 15. And I thought, let me broaden this. So I started a list and I wrote down 15, 20 different ones. And I went onto Twitter and I said, if you would choose one article or book that you would say is a seminal book in how people learn, how children learn. Yeah, so very specific. It's about learning. So it's not about classroom behavior, and it's not in organizing schools and things like that. It's about learning. And I got all of these answers, and I just wrote them all down. And I got some doubles, and I got some other things that I thought, oh, this is rubbish. A lot of the things confirmation bias, what I also thought, but there were also a number of eye-openers in it. And I made this list, and I made an original blog of about 45 of those, which still every year around the summer, for the summer break, we republish that blog, and it still gets quite a number of hits. It's the blog that I have with Miriam. Miriam Nelen, who you would call Miriam Nealon, but it's Miriam Nelen. And the hardest thing was whittling down those 45 that we had into a coherent whole with 5 or 6 sections that were approximately equally populated to writing the book. So killing your darlings was harder than giving birth to them.
Oh, you know what? You do have these wonderful ways of explaining your points. And in terms of, so that's obviously how you went about collecting what papers and studies you'd focus on. Did you say, right, I'll take this one, you take this one, or and then sort of edit it? Because I've had a few duo authors. I've had because obviously Oliver Caviglioli illustrated your book as well, and I had my first guest was Oliver and Tom Shevington, and they work together with walkthroughs. Yeah, and then authors of The Science of Learning, Bradley Bushk and Edward Watson. So I think this is really interesting about co-authors, and obviously you said, you know, you get along well and you liked his book, but actually the process of writing it, because obviously Carl's in Wellington College, you're in the Netherlands. Is there a lot of back and to and emails and reading this?
That's quite a lot. But it's just at the beginning, we chose the articles that we felt had the most affinity. So it's kind of like you have a list and you put an X marks the spot of what you think you would like to do. And that was like the first step. And then if there were doubles, we would talk it out with the two of us from, often it would be, okay, Carl, you take that one, I'll do something else. There were 1 or 2 or 3 that neither one of us said at the beginning, independently of each other, I want to do that one. And so we discussed who could best do this article or book or whatever. And we ended up with a fairly even distribution of the articles, let's say the chapters. And then each person was first author of their chapter. And so I would write my chapter. We had a template. I would write my chapter and send it to him for editing his ideas, his thoughts, his changes in my article. The rule is put on your tracking in Word and go to it. And I would do the same thing with his. I would say, no, that example isn't so good. I would use that one. Or Carl, you tend to choose quite a lot from English. That's very normal because he's an English teacher. I'll write this one in about mathematics or about biology or whatever. So just that type of back and forth doing it. Also sharing jobs. His job was getting I was doing certain things in the book. He had, for example, getting the rights to illustrations and things like that. So we just shared the tasks and worked on it in a very organic way together. I don't think we ever had one argument during the whole writing of the book.
Oh, well, that's
never once that I said, no, sorry, over my dead body, it's not going to be that. Never.
Well, I'm really good friends with Robin McPherson, and he said that sometimes him and Carl disagreed, but he absolutely loves Carl Hendrik. So it was never anything major. They're just slightly different, but I can imagine. Obviously,
I don't know. They're possibly coming from the same thing from teaching. Carl and I never actually disagreed. There were certain times that we didn't understand each other, but as intelligent adults, it wasn't a question of no. It's like, what do you mean here? I don't understand what you're trying to say. And that was then often more than enough to resolve anything. There was absolutely, I mean, it sounds very idyllic, but there was nothing in any way that was in the neighborhood of an actual disagreement between the two of us. It was really 100% agreement and clarification. between
Yeah, I mean,
sequence.
following you both, I've never met Karl-Heinrich, but I've been following him for years and think he's a fantastic writer. So that actually doesn't surprise me. And I'm really looking forward to the, you'll be speaking at a few events together. You've got your webinar coming up. I think
On
that's
the 3rd of June, I think it is.
3rd of June, and that is, I think that's the start of a series, because you'll talk about, we're talking about memory, how children learn, cognitive load theory.
Doing the book. The first webinar is on section 1 of the book.
Oh yeah, part 1. How does our brain work?
How does our brain work? So we'll be discussing what's there, and it's something if you've read the book, it will enrich what you've read. If you haven't read the book, it's a great organizer to the different chapters in the book, but it's also standalone. It should give you, after an hour and a half, it should give you a very good overview of how our brain works in relation to learning. We're not going to discuss the physiology and the pathology of brains, all in relation to how it is. And so we're going to go step for step through the different sections of the book.
And there's also, because I was chatting to Carl about it, and I've looked and I'm signed up, and there's also a section for live question and answer for the people who were there live. And I think that is really important as well. I mean, to be honest, actually, people can tweet you. You're very active on social media and so on. But this comes back to what I said about that and how you've mentioned Twitter, and about the connection between the academic research community and teachers. And I've contacted the Bjorks previously when I haven't always understood a research paper I've read. And actually, I wasn't really the target audience, shall we say, for that paper. And I think that's why I also recommended your American Educator article, because it's just a fantastic research summary.
Job.
Yeah,
that's as researchers, I get a number of emails a day asking me questions, and I don't think anyone has actually had to wait more than 24 hours to get an answer. If I can answer it, that's even I feel that's my job as let's call it expert in my area, to help anyone who has a civil question relating to a problem that he or she has, or something I read in this book this, and I read in that book that. Is that that was the last one I got. I read in this book that you wrote this, I read in that book. Are you now, is there a difference? Are you actually arguing against yourself? And I just explained it, and I got back, that was the same evening. The next day I got, oh, thank you. I now I understand. It wasn't clear to me. I didn't think of it in that way, and of course, it's not a contradiction in it. That's our job as scientists, to make science understandable for people and being approachable.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The Bjorks are like that. John Sweller is an incredible example of that. I mean, John, you can get in touch with any hour of the day or night. He'll say first, I don't have very much time, and a half hour later, you have your answer. You know, he's great. He's the example. He's the epitome of the accessible scientist.
I mean, that is fantastic. I know, yes, he's working with Greg Ashman, isn't he, John Sweller, and his work's been incredible. And last week, it was John Hattie was my guest, and I reached out to him as I reached out to you. Now, this was interesting. John Hattie said that we don't need more evidence. We need to now focus on implementing that evidence. Would you agree with that? Or I mean, it was just sort of
to a certain extent. There are certain things it's too broad a statement. It's like never make an examination question with all or never in it. There are a lot of things that we know that we actually no longer need to get more evidence on. Think of it in terms of medicine. There are we know certain things. We don't have to prove that an antibiotic works with a bacteria. We know that it works. And there are anti-vaxxers who you'll never convince, but we don't need more evidence on that. But there are new things happening that we do still need evidence about. Just the idea of moving things from either spoken or print to a multimedia format are the same rules that work, or laws or concept or principles that work by the one, do they work with the other? So I agree with John up to a certain point. What we need to do is have people now make it accessible and have people make use of it. But there are still certain things that we need a bit more evidence for in different areas, in different age groups. We know that something works there, and there's been a certain amount of research, but does it work in other? Going back to Dunlosky and Catherine Lawson, John Dunlosky, Catherine Lawson, Mitch Nathan, and Dan Willingham article. What they did there is they looked, does it work in every age group, in every subject area, and for learning every type of thing, like from repetition or up to and including application and evaluation and things like that. And some of the categories, if you looked at that, they said we don't have enough evidence to say that it works with every age category, which means that we need more research in certain age categories to see whether or not something that maybe works at the secondary or the university level also works at the elementary school level. Now, let's see that, and let's get the answer, because if the answer is no, we need to know that. And if the answer is yes, we need to know that. Doing research means sometimes getting the answer no, and that's great, because then you don't make the mistake of using something that you don't use an antibiotic on a virus. You have to study viruses to know that antibiotics don't work with viruses. It has to be a living organism to have the antibiotic work. And that's a bacteria and not a virus. Now, if we didn't know that, we'd be still using penicillin for a viral infection, and that doesn't work. So we did research, more research, and we found that it didn't work. Now we need research also on what works and what doesn't work, and when does it work, doesn't it work, and where doesn't it work. That's what we have to do. That's our job as teachers, as educators, as researchers.
That really does link in well with John Hattie's message about what works best, and that question that is a simple question, but we're making our way there. We've talked about this. We're going in the right direction. I'm just going to ask one more question. I'm so sad that time is up, because Paul, I absolutely could talk to you all day. It's just I've been giggling. I've been laughing, but I've also learned a lot, and it's incredible. Now, you said that you were retired, but we've sort of debunked that, I think, that's not true. So my question to you is actually, what's next? What's in the sort of the near? You mentioned about a few research ed events, and you're the keynote, a keynote with Carl Hendrik at Education Festival. Because what I was also thinking about, there is potential for you and Carl Hendrik to do another book with this.
Yes.
There absolutely is.
Let's put it this way. It's top secret. Carl and I and someone else are busy at the moment writing a new book. But that's as much as I'm going to say. It will go to the publisher on the 1st of October. And at the moment it leaves my hands and goes to the publisher, that's the moment that we will tell people about it. We'll drop a discreet little tweet.
It will be discreet.
And see who picks it up. But we don't want. There are too many people who are capable of, in 3 weeks, writing something that looks like what you're planning to do. Let's keep it a secret until it's out of my fingers, when it's gripped away from my cold, dead fingers, and the publisher is working with it. We'll also be working with Oliver on it.
Oh,
So
yeah, he's brilliant.
We push it back together with a fourth author.
And
we've sworn each other to secrecy about it.
Right, well, here at Teacher Talk Radio, we won't tell anybody, but that little exclusive is enough.
A new book is coming, but that's as much as you know.
Okay.
About the Beatles, Liverpool, and Ajax.
Well, do you know, I'd probably read any book unless it was about Liverpool Football Club, then maybe not. But no, I'm sure that I actually am a huge fan of Jurgen Klopp. He's the manager, so it's a bit strange, my football relationship there. But that is so exciting. So clearly you've got lots of online events, you've got lots of in-person event plans, you've got more books on the way. Didn't you write something recently as well about online learning and about or was that something that you were? I remember hearing something.
I gave webinars on it, and I've written articles about online learning, but I'm not going to write a book about that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. Even your research at home, that was just solid advice.
Yeah,
that was applying to that context. But having said that, we can apply it in the context that we're in now, which is obviously we're transitioning back to the classroom. Well, I look forward to that very secret book. I look forward to your webinar, which I'm signed up to, and an education festival. Oh, and to hear, I've never heard you and Carl Hendrik speak together, so I think that will be a real treat for everyone to hear you both. And this has been a little bit of a taster for anyone about your character, Paul, and how intelligent and how witty you are. And I'm just so grateful that you've taken the time to talk to me today.
It's my pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking and interacting with you. And one of these days, you'll put on your red shoes and we'll go dancing at some research ed conference somewhere in the world.
Oh, I know. I cannot wait for that. And when that happens, we'll make sure we put the red shoes all over Twitter.
Very good. Very good.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And thank you to everybody. Take care, Paul. Feel free to go. I'm just going to wrap up the show now. Oh, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you, Paul.
Speak to you soon. All my love.
Bye.
Stay safe,
thank
healthy.
You. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, that was just amazing. I absolutely loved that. As you can tell, I sort of was giggling throughout, but also learned so much. And Paul, I'm not surprised by that. He is incredible. So do check out his website, his blog. I will share now on Twitter his book with Carl Hendrik, How Learning Happens. But also, if you're interested in his previous work, his work with Pedro and Casper, I've got that book about urban myths. It's really, really good. And you can download a free chapter from his new book. All of this I will share on social media. Oh, and finally, before I do the closing jingle, my next guest joining me next week is the wonderful Alex Quigley. So do not miss that. And thank you, Jenny. What an interview. Yeah, absolutely. What an interview. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe and enjoy. Take care.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.